I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Vietnam Veterans News Podcast. News of interest about Vietnam veterans from a Vietnam veteran. Now, here's your host, Mac Payne.
This is Mac Payne here with episode 16903 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. News about the Vietnam War and the brave veterans who served there, as told to you by yours truly, a Vietnam veteran. In the previous episode, I talked about why we turned our back on Ho Chi Minh back in 1945. It was sort of a downer story because it talked about a decision that was made at the end of World War II, when Ho Chi Minh, who was one of our best allies in the war when it came to fighting the Japanese over in Indochina, we turned our back on them. Ho Chi Minh liked America. He wanted America to help him set up a free Vietnam. He even quoted our Declaration of Independence when he spoke to 500,000 Vietnamese at the end of World War II in Hanoi. But instead of helping Ho Chi Minh set up a new country in Vietnam, we decided to go with the French and assist them in retaking Indochina as one of their colonies. It is so easy to be a Monday morning quarterback, but you wonder why they made such a boneheaded decision that later resulted in there being a new memorial erected in Washington, D.C., made out of black marble, with 58,318 names etched upon its surface. Those were the names of the people who gave their lives in a war where we were fighting against Ho Chi Minh. I believe all that could have been avoided. It's a sad story. To sort of cleanse that story out of our thoughts about the Vietnam War, in this episode I'm going to talk to you about something a little simpler to understand, and that is the humble crossbow. That's right, the crossbow. Recently, I saw a very interesting story on the Special Operations Forces Report website about crossbows. It made me think of the crossbow that a Montagnard chieftain, or maybe he was a warrior, or I don't know what he was, presented to me back in August of 1968 way out at the Dak Seang Special Forces Camp in the Central Highlands of Vietnam. I was very honored to receive that. That's because I was so happy to be sent out on that special mission to Dak Seang from the 4th Division Base Camp back at Camp Hanari. As the tides of war had turned, I had been forced to return to the base camp back there at the division headquarters, and I really didn't like it there. I liked it better when I was out detached with the 3rd Brigade on the coastline of that beautiful country, out at places like Duc Pho, Bang San, Hill 63 at LZ Baldy. I liked it out there away from the flagpole. But as the fortunes of war turned, things changed, and I had to go back to the base camp, where I hated it back there at the base camp. When this opportunity came to go out to Dak Seang on a special mission supporting the guys up and around Dak To, I thought, hey, this is going to be good. I'll get the opportunity to get out of the base camp. Luckily, I spent 3 weeks up there, and it was wonderful, way up in the mountains, isolated. The only people there was a Special Forces team, and if you've ever been around Special Forces teams, they can be very interesting and entertaining because generally they are a bunch of unusual people, mostly unusually good. Got to know them quite well. That was interesting. Also, what was interesting about my stay up there was they had a whole tribe of Montagnards up there. That means warriors, families, children, old people, everybody. There must have been several hundred of those Montagnards up there. I got to meet and know them. Never did talk to any of them other than sign language, but I got along with them real well. I got a kick out of the fact that even though we were way out in the middle of nowhere, somehow these Montagnards would get these boom boxes and carry them around on their shoulders when they went down to the creek to do their laundry, listening to the Rolling Stones. The Montagnards liked the Rolling Stones. I developed a nice relationship with everybody there. Thank goodness my guardian angel Gabriel was watching out for me, because the day after I returned to Campanari, the NVA came in and wiped out the place. Now, I have seen accounts of that attack back in August of 1968. They said the Special Forces guys and the Montagnards beat off the attack by the NVA. But if I remember correctly, and I was not there, but I was a few miles away, we were told the NVA came in there with tanks and wiped the place out, eliminated the Special Forces team, and sent the Montagnards flying out through the mountains. Whatever it was, I was glad I was not there. It happened the day after I left. But I walked away from that time up there at Dak Seang with a very special memento. That crossbow. I still have it today hanging on the wall. 52 years later. It is still in brand new condition. If you wanted to take it out and shoot it, it would still work. That's why I was impressed by this story on the Special Operations Forces Report website. By the way, if you're not familiar with that outfit, they were formed back in 2012 due to the lack of authentic military content in the world after they recognized an increase of online interest in post-9/11 world of military and special operations. Special Operations Forces Report is part news and part entertainment. They do editorials, podcast, and video. But mostly they are a strong online community. I appreciate what they're doing very much because they supply stories like this one about the crossbows. I'm going to share the story that they published about crossbows because it is so interesting, and they were used very effectively in Vietnam by the Montagnards. We all like the Montagnards a lot. They said they were backward. Maybe they were. They didn't wear a whole lot of clothes. Most of the women walked around topless. Those Montagnard women, as I remember, did not have the exact same physiques as the Vietnamese women, who were generally sort of flat-chested. The Montagnard women were a little different in that regard. That's why it was so nice to hang out with a tribe of Montagnards up there in the Central Highlands of Vietnam. Of course, I only looked at them and talked to the men. I would never do anything with a Montagnard woman, especially if there were Montagnard warriors around. I'm just thankful that one chieftain gave me that crossbow that I have to this day. After reading this story about crossbows, that one is even more special to me. I hope they will be more special to you after you hear this story. The title of it is From the Greeks to Vietnam, the Military Use of Crossbows. What's interesting about the use of crossbows in Vietnam is that the Chinese are credited with inventing crossbows back in the 5th century BC. Since the Chinese were running things down in Vietnam, you can see how the Vietnamese would pick up on using them. This story was submitted by the Special Operations Forces Report editorial staff. They did a good job on it. That's another reason I'm sharing it with you. And by the way, if you would like to see the actual crossbow that was presented to me by the friendly Montagnards out at Dak Seang in August of 1968, all you've got to do is go over to the podcast website, VietnamVeteranNews.com, look at episode 16903, and there you will see that crossbow. The string on it has gone away, but the crossbow itself and the arrows are still there, and they are still as good as the day they were given to me 52 years ago. Check it out. I think you'd find it interesting. Right now, let's take a look at this story about crossbows. Dateline, SOFREP.com website. Crossbows have been around since humans could pick up tools, being mentioned as early as biblical times. The crossbow has shaped the course of humanity, being the weapon of choice for countless armies throughout history. The history of the crossbow is certainly a long one. First of all, what exactly is a crossbow? It is a weapon composed of a bow and an arrow. Very basic. The most basic crossbow design is a horizontal bow mounted on a stock that shoots arrows. In recent years, the crossbow has been dramatically transformed, with more variations being made available. However, any variant of the crossbow that looks like a horizontal bow is considered a crossbow, despite what features and accessories that it may have. The crossbow design we know today was first invented in the 5th century BC in China. It was designed to be a lethal weapon for use in combat. Today they have all sorts of variations of crossbows. They include the recurve crossbow, the compound crossbow, rifle crossbow, pistol crossbow, and, get this, repeating crossbows. The crossbow played a prominent role in warfare across East Asia, Europe, and the Levant, essentially revolutionizing warfare. Just for your information, the Levant refers to the Eastern Mediterranean and Western Asia, sort of over in Iraq, Lebanon, Turkey, Egypt, places like that. Continuing. Between the 10th and 15th centuries in Europe, warfare was generally on a small scale compared to modern standards, and usually between two small groups of knights and retainers with peasants armed with bows and arrows. Battles were usually planned, with parties being able to choose their location and arrange their army. Crossbows were the weapon of choice during this time. Crossbowmen were well trained and put on the front line to shoot and utilize the firepower that comes with the weapon. Planning and preparation were key in maximizing the benefits of the crossbow. The positioning of the crossbowman was prearranged to correlate with the range of the weapon. With skilled crossbowmen, crossbows could fire with a precision that beat any other weapon of the time. And unlike other weapons, crossbows were perfect in both defense and offense, as they had high power and accuracy. Crossbowmen were generally from upper-class backgrounds, and they were usually taught the weapon from childhood. They were well regarded due to the skill needed to successfully hit a target and operate the crossbow. The crossbow was a top choice for many cultures, as it was generally a very cheap piece of weaponry that was easy to manufacture. Mounted soldiers. During the medieval period, crossbows were the weapon of choice for both infantry and mounted soldiers. For example, the King of France at the time, Philip Augustus, had mounted soldiers use crossbows against England. Pope Gregory IX used mounted crossbowmen in 1239 as part of his mobile defense against attacks by the Lombard League. This use of the crossbow was generally successful. In China was behind the widespread global use of the crossbow we recognize today. Archaeological findings suggest that the Terracotta Army used handheld crossbows in warfare. They were found buried in the tomb of Qin Shi Huang with crossbows that featured bronze trigger mechanisms. It's believed that the Chinese added accessories and features to the crossbow to increase its lethality, making it the ultimate weapon for warfare. In the 12th century, the Chinese exported the new design of the crossbow to the Champa, now Vietnam, where it was used in military campaigns. The Greeks. The ancient Greeks used a type of crossbow called a gastrofete. That was invented around 399 BC. The design of the gastrophetes was that of a composite flexion bow with a sliding arrow rest. This was a very early design, much bigger and much less portable than the crossbow we know and use today. Ratchets held the trigger back, and a simple forked sear was held closed by a rotating bar. Some of the Greek crossbows were found to be able to fire 2 projectiles at one time. This design was the predecessor to the ballista. Now let's take a look at the modern use of crossbows in the military. In 2020, most crossbow owners use the weapon for either target shooting or sport hunting. However, the weapon still plays a small role in modern warfare. Modern crossbows are designed to be easier to carry around without weighing too much. Size and portability are two of the main differences between modern and ancient crossbows. One of the big things about crossbows is that they can fire silently. This is something that is valuable in warfare when you need to stay silent and unnoticed by the enemy. Crossbows may not anymore be a feasible option for warfare on a large scale, but they're a great choice for missions that require silence. Crossbows in Vietnam. Crossbows were used by the native Montagnards of the Vietnamese highlands against the Viet Cong during the Vietnam War and before. The Montagnard Army used crossbows and proved to be extremely valuable to U.S. forces operating in Vietnam at the time. In fact, Green Berets used Montagnard crossbowmen in their teams. That's right, the Green Berets really liked the Montagnards, just like those Special Forces guys up at Seang. In conclusion, although faster, lighter, and more efficient weapons are now used in warfare, crossbows certainly have a place in the history of war. They have been the weapon of choice for many armies over the centuries. Now, the crossbow is generally used for hunting as opposed to warfare, but it still has a place in our world. Hearing that story makes me appreciate even more the crossbow that was given to me by the Montagnard chieftain many years ago, and that is still hanging on my wall to this very day. There you have the story of the simple little crossbow and how important it has been throughout history, even to this very day. I think the crossbow deserves a round of applause for what they've done for mankind down through the years. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. This is Mac Payne here, closing out episode 1693 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. You are cordially invited to return again soon and often to listen to more of these stories coming your way on this podcast, the Vietnam Veteran News.
How about that? Ain't that a mess?